My hands trembled as the man in the police uniform bellowed at the sky, his voice sharp with false authority. "Stop! No landing permitted," he shouted, waving a plastic badge that glinted cheaply in the sunlight. On my sprawling 50-acre ranch outside Willow Creek, a frail, elderly veteran named Walter Brooks lay gasping for air, his life slipping away with every shallow breath. I felt utterly powerless, caught in a surreal nightmare. The officer, who called himself Deputy Mark Sullivan, looked off. His radio was a toy, his uniform ill-fitting, with cartoonish socks peeking out from two short pants. Beside him stood my neighbor, Evelyn Harper, claiming to be the president of a homeowners association I'd never heard of, her clipboard brimming with official-looking papers. Above us, a rescue helicopter circled, unable to land, as Walter's condition worsened. Have you ever felt trapped by someone wielding fake authority, unable to fight back? Comment below and share where you're reading from. I'm Nathan Cole, and 3 years ago, I left my life as a paramedic in the city after losing my wife, Sarah, to cancer. The urban chaos, sirens, emergencies, constant reminders of our shattered dreams became unbearable. So, I packed up my kids, 16-year-old Emily and 12-year-old Jack, and moved to this quiet ranch in Willow Creek, Virginia, in the spring of 2022. I traded my medic gear for work boots, hoping to raise cattle, grow vegetables, and find peace in the countryside, far from the city's clamor. My property sits on the edge of a new suburban development, where city folks chase a taste of rural life but still crave their artisanal coffee runs. I thought we'd live simply, maybe sell a few calves each year. I couldn't have been more wrong about the quiet. It all began one crisp April morning in 2024 while I was feeding my cattle. A woman in a sleek business suit, Evelyn Harper, marched across my land like she owned it, her heels sinking into the dirt. Clutching a clipboard and wearing a smug expression, she introduced herself as the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. "Mr. Cole, your property violates neighborhood regulations," she declared, listing absurd infractions. My cow's mooing was noise pollution, my chicken coop was a health hazard, my vegetable garden attracted dangerous wildlife, and my fence was too tall for standards I'd never agreed to. I stared, half expecting her to say my roosters were plotting a coup. I'd lived here 3 years without a whisper of an HOA. When I questioned her, Evelyn flashed a cold smile and handed me documents with fancy letterheads from something called the Central Property Authority. They looked official until you noticed the typos and vague legal jargon. Then a car rolled up my gravel drive, painted like a police cruiser. Out stepped Mark Sullivan, strutting with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Deputy Sullivan, here to investigate noise complaints and unauthorized farming," he announced. "But as a former paramedic, I'm trained to spot details others miss." His badge looked like it came from a costume shop, his radio lacked an antenna, and his uniform was a mess complete with SpongeBob socks. I asked which department he served, and his vague regional task force answer only deepened my suspicion. When he demanded to see my ranch permits, documents that don't exist for private rural land, threatened fines for unlicensed business operations. Evelyn nodded approvingly, and I realized they were running a coordinated scam, though I couldn't yet grasp their endgame. Sullivan's act was almost comical. He misquoted police codes, his badge fell off mid-tirade, and his radio crackled like a child's walkie-talkie. He even tried to cite my rooster for crowing at dawn, as if nature itself needed a permit. My neighbors, sensing the absurdity, started filming. When my rooster, offended by the accusation, pecked at Sullivan's pants, buttons flew, and he stumbled, exposing his sham further. I snapped a photo of his license plate and called a friend with access to vehicle records. The car was registered to Mark Sullivan, private citizen, not a police department. This was no cop. He was a fraud. The next day, Evelyn returned with a fine notice for $1,500 from the Central Property Authority, complete with fake case numbers and a bank account for payment that screamed scam. I scrutinized the document, spotting inconsistencies no real government form would have. "Evelyn, this is as legit as a monopoly deed," I said, but she just smirked, warning of escalated enforcement. Sullivan began daily harassment, snapping photos of my cows like he was building a case. Worse, he stopped my kids at the bus stop, demanding ID checks for minors in an agricultural zone. Emily and Jack came home terrified, asking if they'd be arrested for feeding chickens. My blood boiled. I warned Sullivan to stay away from my kids, but Evelyn kept their scheme just legal enough to avoid real law enforcement scrutiny. She also turned my neighbors against me, spreading fake environmental reports claiming my cattle polluted groundwater and forged complaints about my ranch lowering property values. Many believed her, swayed by her polished documents and confident tone. I called every government office I could: City Hall, County Planning, State Agriculture. No one had heard of her HOA or authority. Frustratingly, they dismissed it as a civil dispute, leaving me to fight alone. That's when Sullivan tried to arrest my rooster again, only to be chased by the bird, his uniform unraveling as neighbors laughed and recorded. Hope arrived with Laura Bennett, a retired detective who'd moved next door after 30 years in law enforcement. She spotted Sullivan's fake act immediately. No real cop wears cartoon socks or botches radio codes. Laura dug into their operation, tailing Sullivan to a gas station where he changed out of his costume and collected cash payments. His uniform? Ordered from a costume shop. His badge? An eBay purchase. Evelyn's documents? Printed on store-bought software. Laura's surveillance revealed Evelyn's living room as a fake office, filled with rubber stamps and forged letterheads. Overhearing Evelyn on a call, we learned her true motive. My ranch sat in the path of a $50 million shopping mall project. She needed my land to seal the deal, using her fake HOA to pressure me into selling through intimidation and fines. Sullivan, a disgraced ex-mall guard fired for impersonating cops, was her hired muscle, paid $200 daily to play the role. The situation turned deadly when Evelyn targeted Walter Brooks, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran with heart issues living nearby. She convinced him my ranch was a hazard, showing him forged documents about groundwater contamination and code violations. Believing her, Walter joined a safety inspection on my property. Sullivan, in a plastic hard hat, spouted nonsense about manure limits and permit-less gardens. I noticed Walter's pale face and heavy breathing. "Are you okay?" I asked, but Evelyn seized the moment, blaming his distress on my dangerous ranch. As Walter clutched his chest, she accused me of making him sick, using his pain to fuel her narrative. When Walter collapsed, I sprang into action, checking his pulse and calling 911 for a helicopter. But Evelyn and Sullivan, instead of helping, escalated their madness. As the chopper approached, Sullivan ran into the landing zone, waving his fake badge and shouting, "No clearance. This is a crime scene." Evelyn screamed about HOA jurisdiction, ordering the pilot to abort. The pilot, Captain Hayes, radioed for verification, confused by Sullivan's gibberish. Walter's pulse weakened, and every second mattered. Laura sprinted over, phone in hand, playing a recording of Evelyn instructing Sullivan to scare me into selling. Neighbors, now seeing the truth, were outraged. Sullivan, cornered, confessed, "I'm not a cop. Evelyn paid me to scare him." But Evelyn, desperate to save her scheme, pulled a prop gun, waving it at Laura and me, screaming about legitimate business. Neighbors called 911, reporting an armed standoff. Real police arrived: SWAT, paramedics, even FBI, triggered by reports of a fake cop and armed woman blocking a medical evacuation. Sullivan threw down his props and tried to flee, but was tackled. Evelyn, delusional, ranted about property values as SWAT cuffed her. The chopper landed, and medics rushed Walter to a hospital, where he later recovered, thanks to my quick response. The FBI revealed Evelyn's authority was part of a multi-state land fraud ring, targeting rural owners for millions. She faced 15 to 20 years for fraud, extortion, and endangering lives. Sullivan got 5 to 7 years for impersonation and conspiracy. My neighbors, ashamed for believing Evelyn, rallied around me, offering food and help. Walter became family, sharing war stories with my kids and teaching them to spot fake authority. At a community barbecue celebrating his recovery, he toasted, "To Nathan, who fought for truth and saved my life." Real community stands against lies. Captain Hayes visited, praising my calm under pressure. As I watched my kids play in the pasture, I realized my ranch stood for resilience against deception. What would you have done against Evelyn's scheme? Should neighbors always verify official claims, or is trust enough? Could you spot a fake cop like Sullivan? Comment below, share your wildest neighbor story, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real-life drama.